Good morning. Thank you for joining me once again for 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and today we're going to be talking about the Apostle Andrew. I have a great deal of affection and admiration for Andrew. He's largely forgotten by most of us. In fact, I think he was probably largely forgotten in the first century until John, in his Gospel, told us more about him. Before Jesus came along, there were 2 sets of brothers who were working together as partners in the fishing business on the Sea of Galilee, and both sets of brothers each were using their own boat. There were the sons of Zebedee, James and John, and there were Peter and Andrew, who owned their boat. James and John may have owned their boat, or they may have been fishing in their dad's boat, I'm not sure. But there were 4 brothers, 2 sets. 2 older brothers, Peter and James, and 2 younger brothers, Andrew and John. And all 4 were called to be apostles of Jesus, called to be disciples very early. And of the 4, 3 became the inner circle of Jesus. When Jesus went away and only took, a few apostles with him, it was Peter, James, and John. Peter, James, and John went in the room when Jesus raised Jairus' daughter from the dead. Peter, James, and John went up on the Mount of Transfiguration. Peter, James, and John went into the Garden of Gethsemane with Jesus. Peter, James, and John. That's just 3. Who was left out of that equation? Andrew. And Andrew was almost certainly the little brother, as is John. And for the 4 then to become 3, and for the little brother Andrew to be left out, had to be really hard. Birth order dynamics, are constant among human beings, and I'm sure it's constant across centuries. And it could not have been easy for Andrew to have been that person, seemingly left behind, less close to Jesus than the 3 that he had been so close to. And now he's excluded from them as well sometimes. And so there's a double exclusion that a person would naturally feel in their heart. But if that ever became overwhelming for him or affected him or defined his character, we are never told it. At the end of the first century, the other little brother of that group of 4, John, takes the time to tell us more than just Andrew's name. The first thing that we know about Andrew is that he was one of the 2 first disciples Jesus ever had. We're told in John, the 1st chapter, that when Jesus came to John the Baptist to be baptized by him, that John immediately identified him as the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. The second day after he said that, John was standing with 2 of his disciples, and he looked upon Jesus as he walked by, and he said, "Behold the Lamb of God." And the 2 disciples heard him speak, and they followed Jesus. And Jesus turned around and saw that they were following him, and they said to them, "What do you seek?" And they said to him, "Rabbi," which means teacher, "where are you staying?" And he said to them, "Come and see." And they therefore saw where he was staying, and they stayed with him that whole day, because it was about the 10th hour. And one of the 2 who heard John speak and followed him was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. He first found his own brother Simon and said to him, "We have found the Messiah," which translated means the Christ. And he brought him to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, "You are Simon, son of John. You shall be called Cephas," which translated into Greek is Peter. Okay. John tells us right off that the very first disciple Jesus called was Andrew, and perhaps Philip, who features later on in just a few verses. Andrew is the first one to say, "This is the Messiah." Andrew introduces Peter to his brother as the Messiah, and as we know from Luke's Gospel, Peter is hesitant. But the first thing Andrew does when he realizes that Jesus is the Messiah is to bring Peter to Jesus. Andrew is always bringing Peter to Jesus. In chapter 6, he brings the little boy who has the lunch to share to Jesus before the feeding of the 5,000. And later in the chapter, he and Philip bring to Jesus certain Greeks who have a question for him. We meet him 3 times, 3 times he's bringing people to Jesus in John's gospel. And so we know from John's gospel a whole lot about Andrew the apostle. We don't know what happened to him from the Bible. We do know that Andrew and Matthew are the only 2 apostles mentioned in the Quran, but they are as disciples of Jesus. And they are mentioned not only in the Quran, but in early Christian literature as being a twosome, the way Peter and John were a twosome, that Matthew and Andrew early on were partners, and that they went into Africa, and that they evangelized Ethiopia. And then Andrew, according to history, went into Eastern Europe. In fact, he is the patron saint of Russia. I'm not sure if any of that part of it is true, but there seems to be very strong evidence that he and Matthew were an evangelistic team early on. Well, thank you for joining me for 5 good minutes, which is now turned into 6, as we talked about Andrew. Tomorrow we'll talk about his evangelism partner, Matthew.